So what happens when you've built something from the ground up and it's suddenly taken away? How do you recover when the organization, the ministry, the mission that you've poured your heart into is no longer yours to lead? This is the exact scenario that Brian Fisher, my guest today, faced. In the first part of our conversation, we talk about what it's really like to be thrust into the wilderness after a life-altering transition. From personal shock to the loneliness that follows, we're looking into what happens when you're forced to step away from your calling and how to rebuild when it feels like everything is lost. We're taking this episode into two parts, and in this first half, we're going to look at the emotional toll that sudden career shifts take and how the day zero experience can feel like an overwhelming tidal wave. Listen in. This is Brian Fisher on the Life After Ministry podcast. Hey, Brian Fisher, welcome to the Life After Ministry podcast. Good to have you here.
Hey, Matt Davis. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Our paths got to cross 18 months ago, 12 months ago.
At least, yeah.
And worked on some stuff with your ministry that we'll get to, Soil and Roots. But before we get to that beautiful promised land, let's go back into the wilderness a little bit. And I want to explore a little bit of your story. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we highlight out the get-go, especially with pastoral transitions, I realize that the name Pastoral Transitions puts us in the context of the church, but really that was just the URL that was available to us at the time. And our heart is for pastors, but really beyond that, our heart is for people in ministry and especially on the front lines in vocational ministry. And so what that extends to is not just the church, but nonprofits, Christian schools and higher education, missions agencies, even Christian-owned businesses. But you come from the nonprofit sector. And so I just want to really and I jokingly say this, but I absolutely mean it, is that we want to be able to serve the kingdom wherever Christians can mess things up, which gives us a lot of places that we can actually work. But give a little bit of your backstory of what you were coming from. And we've talked about the day zero experience and what does life look like? I know I just asked you 4 questions in there, but somewhere in that, give us a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah, well, my earlier career was all in kind of corporate executive America, and it was split between the for-profit and the nonprofit sector. So I started out in Christian media, then I went into the investment world, securities and stocks and bonds, became a partner in a company there. Then I ran a large media ministry out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Then I was the CEO for a marketing agency in Texas. And then in 2008 or 9, through a crazy story, was called into the pro-life movement. And I started a fledgling 501c3 nonprofit in, I think it was 2009, to save babies and their moms from abortion using technology, data, combined with highly skilled, compassionate, Christ-centered care. And it took off. Became my full-time job in 2012. And it was a great success story. Saved lots of babies and families from abortion, influential in the kingdom space in terms of why we're pro-life, why God honors life. And in 2020, which was a weird year for lots of people, over the summer, the board gave me a sterling review, said, great job, nice raise. And then a few months later, my wife and I were forced out of the organization and said, you're gone, and we're not going to tell you why, and you're never going to know why. And that was it. So one day we were enjoying the fruits of ministry and labor, having built a large pro-life organization, and the next day they sent our possessions home in cardboard boxes.
Man, what is it like to have something that you created from scratch? Like what would 2020 Brian tell 2012 Brian? Because when you start something from scratch and it's brand new, you don't ever imagine that this would ever come outside of your grip in your hands. And when you have a board and you invite a board, and all of a sudden you don't really own this like you think you own this.
Well, that's true. I mean, in the nonprofit, and I used to joke with the staff all the time. I mean, the role of a good leader is to make yourself replaceable, right? You want to be pushing authority and decision-making power and influence down into the organization, because I didn't want to be a celebrity-driven Christian organization. I think we have far too many of them as it is. But I never expected them to act on it. Look, you say those things. I always assumed I would retire or die there. And then with some irony, you look back and you say, well, at least, I did my job. I made myself replaceable because the organization has gone on. And as best as I know, it continues to save babies and is doing great work. So what would I tell 2012 Brian? Look, to have the honor and privilege to serve moms and families, and I think there were something like 18,000 babies rescued during my tenure there. Not at my hands. I would make the worst counselor in the world, but at the hands of other talented staff. It's a thrill. It was an uphill battle. It was exhausting. I'm sure most of the people you talk to, either in pastoral ministry or nonprofit ministry, will tell you, oh, it's great and God's blessed it and I've made so many friends, but there's always a shadow self. There's always undercurrents. And so it was an exhausting 8 years, 9 years for lots of different reasons. And so I probably would have tried to prepare myself better for a far less romantic idea of what running a nonprofit actually is. I was joking with somebody the other day when I was in my 20s, all I wanted to do is lead and manage people. And now that I'm in my 50s, all I want to do is not lead and manage people. So that's part of the trials of being in nonprofit leadership.
An interesting side note is one of the things you told me one time, and I still can't believe it, is the pro-life versus pro-choice kind of nonprofit world is not even close, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's the difference between like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. You think that they're equals, but Coca-Cola is so much further ahead in market share. But like the difference between even the fundraising world of that.
Right. I think the numbers might have changed, but when I was in the industry, we added them up. There's some 4,000 pro-life nonprofits around the country. And if you combined all of their budgets together, all 4,000 groups, it totaled something like $800 million. Planned Parenthood, which is one organization, obviously pro-abortion, their budget's like $1.2 billion. Huh. So one pro-abortion organization is larger than the entire pro-life movement. It was never a fair fight. But I think the tides over the last 10 or 20 years have been changing, and I think the future is bright for the pro-life movement.
Amen. So what do you do as you are walking out on this thing that you built, carrying a cardboard box and trying to make sense? And a lot of what we try to do is answer this question of what do you do on day one after day zero, right? Is how do you start to rebuild your life? But really, you don't start day one, get out of bed and say, I'm going to do something with my life. You kind of have to sit and that day zero kind of lingers a little bit, or even the day one turns into day two. And there's a sadness, there's a depression, there's a season for some. This is not how it goes for everybody, but what was that like in that immediate time of transition for you?
The night that we were forced out, my older son had already moved out of the house, but I called my wife and they forced us both out. So we're both jobless, shocked, dismayed, stunned, just beyond confused. And we sat down and we prayed and we worshiped, and, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So there was some immediate resignation and acceptance, but you wake up the next day and the anger, the rage, the confusion, the self-doubt starts. And for me, the next year was hell. I'd love to say, because I've been a Christian since the age of 6, this just sort of rolled off my back. But it's one thing to be fired from the organization you started and loved. It's another for that community of people that you rallied around act like you're dead. It wasn't like we had a flurry of phone calls and emails and visits and offers to make us dinner. As you might imagine, when something like this happens, people don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And they may have your best interests at heart, but it's awkward. They're scared. They're nervous. They don't know if, I cheated on my wife. Did I steal from the organization? I mean, all sorts of questions come up and, you become a pariah. So I think the hardest thing for me, and probably Jess, was a profound sense of utter loneliness that went on for months and months and months. I went into deep depression and spent many a day in dark rooms just staring at the ceiling.
What did you need in that season? Like, what do you hope? What would you hope for if you could ask somebody, even in the organization, who was a friend that felt like a friend that was parallel, what did you need? What would have been like ideal? Somebody knocking at the door saying, I made some soup, or just did you need that space to be able to just be left alone? What do we need in that season of loneliness and isolation?
At Soil and Roots, we talk about the concept of withness. It's actually a word, withness, meaning not giving advice, not trying to fix things, but just somebody or a group of people that are willing to sit with you in the crap. Day after day, hour after hour, text, phone calls, personal visits. We know that somebody who's suffering from cancer, like we're sort of comfortable doing that. We know if somebody goes through, if somebody's spouse cheats on them and they're left and betrayed, that's sort of, normal and expected. But in these types of cases where there's so many unknowns and so much angst, I think it's just harder. So, yeah, about 6 months in, I realized I must suck at choosing friends. I just have to be horrible at it, because I would hope that if a friend of mine had that sort of experience, that I would be calling or offering to come over or take them out for coffee or something. It's not like that never happened, but it was pretty rare. And that set me on a journey of a lot of personal evaluation and sort of what we call the inward journey. I may not be really wise in terms of who I'm surrounding myself with and the people that I'm attracted to.
So you leaned in on the inward journey. So let's talk about this, the critical journey, the discipleship journey in 6 stages, and what you've come to learn about that journey in the last few years.
It's based on a book written by Janet Hagberg and Robert Guelich named The Critical Journey. And it's a theory. This is not pulled out of the Bible, but they theorized that the spiritual journey, discipleship, could be broken down into 6 stages. And the first 3 are something probably all your audience is familiar with, which is we're introduced to God. That's stage 1. Call it salvation, accepting Jesus, conversion. Stage 2 is learning about him. So we're Bible studies and sucking up sermons and in small groups and trying to accumulate as much biblical information as we can. And then stage 3 is living a life of service. So, it's where we start doing volunteer work. Maybe we become a deacon or an elder. We start doing missions trips. And up until the point where I read the book, I thought that was the entire journey.
That's it. That's the Christian life, right?
That's the Christian life.
Connect, grow, reach. That's every
right.
mission statement that we have in the church.
That's right. But as you read further in the book, the latter 3 stages are where, substantial subsequent transformation happens. Stage 4 is what's called the journey inward, and it involves something called the wall. Stage 5 is the journey outward. And then stage 6, which they call the life of love, is sort of like seeing Jesus in everyday people. Right. It's someone who is so locked into their identity in Christ, so at peace and so safe in the arms of Christ that they just radiate. And I don't mean lovey-dovey pacifist love. I mean, there's something transformative when they walk into the room. Now, I've never met somebody in stage 6, but I know people who have, and they're super identifiable. So for me, those first several years after our departure was the journey inward and the wall, because the self-introspection that I went through was in many cases insufferable, and that's typically a quality of the wall in that 4th stage. And the authors make the case that unfortunately, modern church institutions are awesome at stages 1, 2, and 3. They love to introduce people to Jesus. They love to educate us, and they certainly love when we serve. But there's virtually no engagement or help in these latter stages in the modern institution. None. And I have tested this and asked pastor after pastor and leader after leader, and I have never had anybody disagree with that conclusion. It's almost a universal acceptance that the modern church has no care or concern for stages 4, 5, or 6.
Maybe, it's interesting. I think they want that. I think they want ministry to reflect that, but maybe we just don't know how to get there. And that wall is, I would say, likely if you're listening to the podcast right now, you're you've hit the wall in some way, or the wall hit you. And that's an interesting, the wall is the wilderness, right? The wall is the dark night of the soul. It's the belly of the well experience, right? Like,
right.
What am I doing here? How did I get here? And one of my favorite authors that gives a really good picture of it, Walter Brueggemann, and he writes the spirituality of the Psalms, and talks about the metaphor of the Psalms really telling the story of our lives. And we move into these seasons where we start out in orientation. These are the Psalms of David dancing in the presence of the Lord, and it's great. And that might be the journey steps 1, 2, and 3. But all of a sudden, without warning, we find ourselves thrust into the wall. It's you move from orientation to disorientation. And one of my old seminary professors, it's you move from the bottle to the sippy cup, and the things that you were doing in those first stages don't necessarily work. If you're sucking on the bottle and then you try to suck on the sippy cup, you're going to choke because it just works differently. But the idea is, hopefully, if you enter into that season, there's more milk to be had. But oftentimes, I think that's where we see a lot of people, unfortunately, hit the eject button.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hit the bottom, rock bottom, it's not like, all right, well, here we go. I'm on my way back up. Sometimes you just have to sit there and play with the rocks and sit there for a bit. But how do we do that season, that wall season, the inward journey? Like, how do we do that well? What do you say to somebody who is, hey, welcome. We've been waiting for you. Here's a survival guide for this season of your life.
I think the first step is to create an environment of safety. I imagine most people that have been through the experience you've been through, that I've been through, or that all of your other guests have been through, have a staggering sense of confusion and fear and anxiety. And so for a group of people to surround somebody in the wall and simply be with them and create an environment where it's safe to be authentic, to be raw, to experience and express doubts. And these are things that not all churches are great at dealing with. I think that's really important, because if you look at Jonah in the belly of the whale, or, Christ after his resurrection asking Peter 3 times, do you love me? There's this sense of, again, God's being with us, and it is the expression of that through other people, which gives space to experience the wall. We all go through walls, and we all have options when we hit the wall. And most people will bounce back into earlier stages, or they'll try to numb themselves with everything from illicit substances to Netflix, or they deconstruct, like you said, or they say, gosh, this is a time where I need to really go into my heart. But if we don't experience God's unconditional love in that process of self-awareness or self-exploration, it can be pretty damaging. So it's important to find 1 or 2 brothers or sisters who will take that journey with you.
And I think the paradox of that season is the promised land of reorientation feels too far away. And so we just want to get back to where we were, get me back to the old days. Now, I'll never understand this. I'll have to talk to some Israelites when I get to heaven, the other side, and say, what was it about the experience in the wilderness that you wanted to go back to Egypt? And I always think the biblical narrative is so weird, like, because they were wanting leeks and onions, like, which I think are awful personally. But like, why would you want to go back to that season of your life? And I think it's because it's familiar, right? And there is just something of like, it wasn't there isn't a depth there, but it was easier. Life was easier. And this life and this inward journey, it takes work and it can't be rushed. And so I'm talking to you, and we're 4 years out from day 0 for you. And, we're not quite to your success story, or maybe it's not coming, but maybe you're going to be here in the wilderness for a while. Like, what's your prognostication on your life, and maybe even where you're at today, and where you hope it's Where's all this headed for you?
Well, the journey has had its ups and downs. I mean, I'd love to be able to tell you there's some grand restoration and I'm making more money than I did before and I have a larger organization and,
the bounce back.
My reputation has been restored. None of that's happened. And at some point, it sounds so cliche, but God offers us these opportunities to find our fulfillment in Him versus His blessings. Ooh. And I'm terrible at this. I'm horrible at this. Jess and I were just talking about it last night. And I'm still learning to find my identity, my fulfillment, my all in all in God and not in what He does for me. So that's a tough spot to be. I'll tell you, it was about 2 years ago, God whispered to my heart one day, "What do you want?" It was like Jesus and blind Bartimaeus. He said, "What do you want?" And the question made me very uncomfortable. And a month or two later, He whispered it again. It took me a year to answer the question. A year. And the answer is freedom. Now, that might sound odd because I've been a Christian my whole life. I mean, I'm free from the penalty of sin and death. I know my eternal destination. I've never had a day without Jesus. So why would I want freedom? But the inward journey wrestles with Luke 4:18 and 19. What does it mean to be set free as the oppressed? There's patterns, there's harmful wounds, there are people, there are relationships which remain oppressive even after we say some prayer that God is very interested in freeing us from. The challenge is that path to freedom usually hurts like hell. And it does. Because it's the breaking. I don't know if you remember the Voyage of the Dawn Treader and C.S. Lewis, but used to Scrub gets turned into a dragon, and the process of him being descaled, yeah, is painful. So, as a person who has been going through and continues to go through the descaling process, the path towards true inner freedom and into stage 5, which is wonderfully outward focused, is not simple. It's not easy, and for me, to be 4 years removed and not yet have some great American success story was frustrating in year 2, was just anger driven in year 3. And in year 4 is like, there's a calm acceptance that started to slowly grow that maybe I'll never be restored to some great successful job. Maybe I'll never be a public figure again. Maybe I'll never enjoy financial prosperity, but maybe God is gently drawing me into Him being enough.
So the acceptance of that is the process, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think first is awareness. In order to become free, I think we have to do the hard work of working with Jesus to uncover what we're chained to. So for me, being very performance driven, I've had a long history of being attracted to very seductive personalities. These are types of disordered attachments. That's what Ignatius would call them, disordered attachments. Deeply relational, spiritual things that get in the way of our true freedom. If we don't do the hard work of becoming aware of what those are, it's really hard to be freed of them. So, and that's unpleasant. You have to be willing to look at yourself, but also other people, other close people, friends, family members, highly influential people in your life, and say, where was this ordered and healthy and life-giving, and where was this not? Because if we don't do that sort of work, we're going to remain chained to those things.
And really, the gold is on the other side of this season of suffering. I really think that if we can actually, like, the frustrating thing and the beautiful thing about how God works in these seasons is He's in no hurry to get us out of it. Even though my experience is like, man, when is this going to end? How long, oh Lord, right? This is one of the Brueggemann Psalms, these Psalms of lament. Right. Like, why do you hide your face from me? Where is all of this going? And God was never in a hurry of like, let's get you guys out. I know this is hard. It was like 40 years. It's unbelievable. My tolerance for suffering, my tolerance for discomfort in any way is next to zero. And for 40 years, I mean, that's got to be one of the most hardened group of people, but really found the profound mercy and goodness of God in the midst of that and had a story to tell going into the promised land, right? Like it's hopefully it's the difference between your biography and your testimony is, God did a work in you and through you in this season. And, one of I think it was Piper who said, don't waste your cancer. But that suffering can be transformational if we choose to use that well, allow God to be with us and really to sit with us in that season of the wall, the season of disorientation, right?
Yeah, I think it was John Stonestreet from the Colson Center who said the modern Christian habit is to drop the Romans 8:28 bomb every time something bad happens. He calls it the Romans 8:28 bomb.
Ooh,
I love
like
it. For God causes all things to work together for good. Well, to be honest, I don't like the verse all that much, and I've found it not to be comforting. Because, people are trying to be nice, but hey, on the other side of this, it might not in the way that I define it. I think it was C.S. Lewis that said something to the effect of, why do you think that God's goodness is pleasant? Have you never been to the dentist? His point is God's goodness. I don't doubt that God loves me. What I fear is that my definition of good doesn't align with his.
Yeah.
So is it good for my family to continue to wrestle with the confusion and the oddness of the wilderness experience? It's been 4 years. Maybe it's going to be 4 more. Maybe it's going to be 40. Am I still going to trust and love God as much if these circumstances persist? That is a very difficult question, because my definition of God's goodness, I guarantee you, is different than his definition. But again, what are we hoping in? Am I hoping for restoration as I define it, or am I hoping for freedom as God defines it?
Hey, well, thanks for listening to the Life After Ministry podcast. As you've heard, the fallout from a tough transition can leave you reeling. And Brian's story is a powerful reminder that no one really should have to go through this alone. At Pastoral Transitions, we help pastors and ministry leaders, whether you're in a nonprofit or missions agency, we help to navigate these painful seasons with coaching, with community, with support. Be sure to listen in for part 2 of our conversation coming up real soon. We'll explore and look at how Brian began his journey toward healing and transformation. So stay tuned and listen in to the next episode of the Life After Ministry podcast.